Hello everyone and welcome back to Sedaye Daneshjoo. My name is Ryan Fekrat.
My name is Damaris Cervantes.
In this episode, we're going to be just having a casual coffee table conversation of coffee shop conversation of coursework and study habits and some of the ways that we were able to overcome adversity in college in some sort of nuanced ways. Some of them like planning undergraduate coursework to be more efficient or easier, and how we handled some of the heavier course loads and harder classes, and also some discussion of how we handled standardized tests like the MCAT, how our study habits changed throughout college, and maybe even some ways that that reflected on our personal growth. I know certainly with me, and I'm sure with my co-host here today, Damaris. So I have for you an intro. Coursework selection and study habits are integral to your success in the pre-med years. This episode is going to share your anecdotes regarding our anecdotes regarding those same things, study habits, and how we designed our coursework such that we were able to overcome adversity in undergrad and succeed in a more efficient way. And so question one, and to frame this discussion, is how did you choose your undergraduate concentration or major? And if you could go back, would you change it or do something different when selecting classes? So I was a chemistry major in college. I had a concentration in biology, which just meant that I got to take sort of the bare bones essentials of biology, but I didn't get a minor or a major in it, just enough to kind of understand the field, mostly as it related to chemistry and the more niche field of chemical biology. Damaris, what did you major in?
So going into college, when I was applying, for the most part, I applied something math related. So mostly mathematics, and that's what I ended up doing. To some schools, I applied for applied math or statistics or applied statistics.
Math.
Yes. That's initially what I did, and ended up changing later on, actually. And I ended up graduating with a degree in psychology, but I think we'll get to that in a moment.
Well, yeah, let's dive right into it.
Okay.
You started in math. What was that like from the pre-med perspective? And I guess this kind of extends to the conversation of choosing major as a pre-med. There is a notion that you, either for ego reasons or to thinking like that you're going to better market yourself as a pre-med, that you're going to choose a bio-sci major, when in fact it's not always the best way to market yourself, because like a lot of the things we've talked about on the show, it's kind of like what really matters to you, what are you interested in, because you're going to be studying it for 4+ years, I mean, in some cases 3 years like you did. But like history, for example, if you're really into history, you can study that and still be pre-med. As a matter of fact, you can be any major and still be pre-med. And I think that applies. You thought about pre-law for a while. And
Yeah, I think it applies in a similar way, but maybe not an exact way to other fields. Like if you want to go into law, for example, and you're pre-law, I think it is easier to be able to make that transition than it is for medicine. I would say that it's important to consider probably prerequisite courses as a pre-med. And so I think that might be part of the reason why people might choose a bio major over other things.
For pre-med specifically.
Yeah, for pre-med specifically. And also, like you were saying, they might choose it to be able to better market themselves, but I'm not sure that that makes them exactly more competitive, especially when their peers are of a similar background in bio or something like that.
Yeah. So do you think that it makes them fit in better in medical school if everyone is like normalized and they're all bio-sci? I don't think it really matters.
Then it just makes the pool very homogenous. I don't know that it would necessarily make everybody fit in, because I think there are still differences in personality, and I think there's more nuance to individuals, even if they do study the same thing.
And I want to say different majors may not beget a certain personality type.
Yeah, I agree.
But, well, there are stereotypes that, in America, there's stereotypes that, like, I'm sure abroad as well, that, like, computer science majors are very introverted and it's not conducive of a super vibrant social life. And honestly, the same could be said for my chemistry. Yes. And I honestly think that just the majors themselves, they do create an element of diversity because it's like a scholarly concentration. It's something that you might forget about if you're just focusing too much on, it's kind of a strange way to think about it. Now with so much information online for pre-meds, a lot of the narrative is market yourself as like a person, not a study bot. But honestly, you kind of have to do both. You do have to be able to argue to the admissions committee, and really throughout your career, you're standing on the grounds of like, this is a very scholarly thing, and we endeavor to do scholarly things in practice.
Yeah. I think part of showing what you called the study bot part of yourself would be your statistics, for example, what you get on your MCAT, what your GPA is, and that's kind of an index of how well you did in school, and that's why it is important. And then you're able to really show your own personal flair and personality in things like interviews, even your writing for your personal statement. And that can be said for applying to any graduate school, I would say, is how you answer their questions, what you did for your extracurricular activities, and how you reflect on those things, showing them how they impacted you. And just even with the way you write, I would say, shows your personality as well.
That's a great segue. So you were talking about like MCAT and reflection of personality. This is hopefully going to hit on some of that. This is question 2. How have your study habits changed from when you first started in undergrad to graduating? What prompted those changes, and how effective were your answers to the adversity you faced? Would you go back and change anything about your study habits? So, of course, you would change something about your early study habits, but maybe from something you learned. Is there anything more you'd change? I want to answer this one first. Okay. So, I graduated with like a 3.9 something GPA. Great, right? For admissions purposes to medical school, and you fall within, or I would fall within like the upper bracket with that for like the MCAS 2021 A3 table, where they're showing like the brackets of like success rates. And you could argue that there should be more, because a lot of the like top 50 schools, top 30 schools, their median stats will fall even higher than that. And they still have razor thin acceptance rates. So that aside, my study habits still did change even while maintaining a high GPA, because I found ways to do it easier.
More effectively, would you say?
More effectively. I started out taking community colleges first in high school, and then I actually kept taking them and then transferred to a 4-year university. Taking CC classes was actually surprisingly, community college is like, maybe I have to explain this. Community college is like a step below going to a 4-year university or institution.
Might also be known as a junior college.
Junior college, yeah. And you would think that the classes might be a little easier. They're not. They were actually harder at this particular community college. And I think the purpose was because they were not investing as much in their students. Students were paying less. And the aspect of the education that got gutted was the assistance to students. There was not as much access to tutoring. Teachers didn't do as much hand-holding. They weren't obligated to have the same types of availability as I found at the 4-year university. And then to tack onto that, the classes were just brutal. Tons of homework, and homework was something I even rarely saw. Like mandated homework was something much rarer in four-year university at UCI, which is where we both went. And there, I would brute force study practice problems, practice tests, and I did continue a little bit of that. Keep in mind, I was a chemistry major, so a lot of it was combined quantitative, qualitative thinking with leaning towards like number crunching. And so it is just a lot of repetition for that, understanding the theorems and applying them. There were some classes, though, that exacerbated the underlying problem in brute forcing, which is the lack of critical understanding. And that was actually a math class. You think, oh, more quantitative, more chugging. No, actually in linear algebra and multivariable calculus and Calc 2, we have 2 steps of calculus here. There were problems that, yes, they may have been plug and chug, but they were testing the core concepts of, for example, a specific type of integral, or something like that, a different test that you would use to confirm a limit, but you had to understand it in a more qualitative way, not exactly a binary, but more qualitative, so that there are categories that these problems fall into. If you didn't spot that, just knowing the numbers would not help you. And so that was my first intro to, there is like in my head, the words understanding, where I'm putting things into words. And then there's the numbers understanding of where things I can plug and chug or
So I
something
have
like that.
a question for you. Do you think that at some point you thought that your education was basically just memorization? And did you find that there was a difference between just memorizing something and actually learning?
Yeah. The difference between memorizing and learning, it's nuanced. I think that sometimes you memorize so much that you actually learn, because it has the same effect as having learned it in a more concise way. But memorizing can be just as concise. It depends how you apply it. Are you thinking of a particular broad? I would say that they're pretty neck and neck, but they're a little different. And look, the common answer is like memorizing is you don't truly understand. Learning is that you do truly understand.
I think you can kind of have both, just
Yeah.
like what you're saying. Especially, well, one of the first things that came to mind was anatomy, where you learn different parts of the body, but a lot of it is kind of memorization about where things are. And that's something that we were talking about this morning too.
Yeah. Anatomy is a funny example because it's basically just memorizing a bunch of facts, right?
And then maybe when you get into physiology, that's a little bit more learning how things kind of interact with each other and the body processes that go along with anatomy. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I'm trying to think of an example that is really pure learning. And I don't really think that applies to the undergrad level. What I'm drawn to in answering that is when you really need to have learned something. I guess it's kind of devaluing the undergrad education. It's maybe a pessimistic view to have that you really don't truly need to learn anything in undergrad. And I'll be honest, a lot of my undergraduate education, only the most interesting things I committed to memory or memorized, and then was interested enough to apply those in life and then maybe learn it. But learning is memorizing. There may be a space, there's a large space where they overlap, and then a little bit of space where learning does not overlap with memorizing. I think that space has to do with creativity. It has to do with application. You truly learn something when you can write about it. You can ask questions, original questions about it. I think that even if I was one of those kids that, or I am one of those kids that didn't ask so many questions in lecture, I just kind of sat and listened. I admire those that do, because they're really committed to learning, which not everybody is, but it's not necessitated by most classes or almost any classes that I took in college. So how have your study habits changed? So this is, let me finish out this question, and then I'd actually like you to answer this question as well, because I know you have quite a story. My study habits, I became a lot more efficient. And it really came down to, at the tail end of my my pre-med experience, taking the MCAT. The MCAT was, for me to score as high as I did, was a product of a complete shift in study habits. I still had the work ethic and the drive to do, be disciplined and do the volume of work required to get a good score. But this time it was a lot more efficient, so I could cover a lot more ground. Talking, yes, a little bit of rote rehearsal, but it was spaced repetition. Rote rehearsal is more, and it is the least effective studying method. Rote rehearsal is, blue banana, blue banana, blue banana, and then you run into the room and try to write it down on your test or something like that. Spaced repetition, Anki, great for meta. If you haven't heard about it, it's a app or a computer software that you can make or use pre-made flashcard decks, and based on the forgetting curve, which is itself based in some empirical evidence. I'm sure more is really needed to understand the process by which we forget, but it gives you flashcards based on when you perceive, and the software calculates you will forget the knowledge. That you perceive aspect is when you put in, like, I get a flashcard, I say the answer, I flip the card on the computer, and let's say I got the answer wrong. Okay, I really don't understand that. I'm going to see the card again in 10 minutes versus, oh, that was so easy. I'm going to see the card again in 5 days. That's basically how Anki works. Super critical for scoring well on the MCAT in my case. Damaris, when you first started out in college, what were your study habits? And then when you ended, what did they look like? What did you change?
When I started college, so I started first by going straight into a four-year university from high school, and it was also right after COVID because I started college in 2021. I don't think that I was well prepared for college, even though I had taken advanced placement courses, which are supposed to simulate the level of difficulty that you see in college classes. I really was not ready, and so my study habits were very poor. I think sometimes I would look at my lecture, do homework late, and not really commit the time to be able to actually learn. And so I did really poorly. I ended my first year with a GPA that was lower than a 2.0. And so it's funny because one of your questions is also what changed? Why did you change your study habits? And it was because I no longer qualified for financial aid. So
That was the
then
kick in the butt.
I ended up very broke. I had to start working, even though I didn't want to work in college because the plan was supposed to be able to go to college to just focus on going to school. And I ended up also changing my major from math to psychology. I think part of the reason why I was not very dedicated to my classes and what I attribute my poor grades to is also just possibly indifference to the major and to the courses. I had seen some of the stuff that I was learning in my college course, like calculus, for example, in high school. And I remember in high school, everything being very easy, in particular math. Like I really didn't have to study. And so I think that's why I did not do well my first year of college, is because I wasn't prepared to study. I didn't know how to. And so I had taken some psychology courses just as part of my undergraduate curriculum, like the general education courses that are required at UC Irvine and across other UC campuses or University of California campuses. And I really liked them. I took two introductory psychology classes, and I did really well, and I really liked the material. And so I decided, you know what? I'm just going to switch to this major because it's something that I can do well in, and it's something that I'm interested in. And yeah, so I switched to psychology. And then I would say, I don't know if I would necessarily consider this part of a study habit, or maybe just a good habit to have in college, but I started going to my discussions, even the ones that were not mandatory, because I knew that they would help me. So in these discussion courses, we would meet not with the professor, but with the TA and then a group of other students, either in person or online, to just go over the material that was already presented in class. And of course, it actually did help to be able to see the material multiple times, not just one time in class and maybe a little bit at home. But I would say initially, I was not very effective in my note-taking or in my study habits, because one thing I did, for example, was write every single thing down in my notebook. And now looking back, it's kind of helpful to see everything that I was supposed to learn. And also I ended up becoming a discussion leader for some of these classes that I ended up taking. And so I was able to use that to be able to lead my discussions. But while I was in the course, it was not super helpful. It did help. Of course, I did do well taking notes that way, but it could have been a little bit more effective. And so in that, what I ended up changing was first doing my notes online rather than taking them all down by hand. And so I was able to go back and just look on Google Documents to be able to see the notes. And also I started using more bullet points, shortening the points to trying to see what was most critical. And then looking back on that when I was out of class. And so I think that's also when I would say I did the most learning. When I was in class, I think mostly it was just listening to the professor, but not really being able to fully take everything in until after the class when I was reflecting, looking at my notes. And yeah.
I'd like to conclude this episode with thanking you again for sharing your story. I don't know if I already thanked you, but thank you for sharing your story. In one or two sentences, could you share with us what did you learn, and would you tell yourself, your past self, anything? What did you learn about yourself from that?
I learned that what I prioritize really matters, because if I don't prioritize something, even if it's something that I deem necessary, but not necessarily important, then I don't have drive towards that thing. And I would tell my past self from the very beginning to prioritize my education, because now more than ever, I think it's very important.
Okay. Well, thank you all for watching this episode of Sedaye Daneshjoo. I hope that this conversation was helpful, and us sharing our stories of success and failure and confusion and navigating college and college coursework is beneficial to you. So again, thank you all for watching, and have a nice day. Till next time.